But while the Christian Church allowed for saints, it offered no divine goddess to adore. The newly converted pagans found one of their own and demanded that she be recognized.
There's no question that in the Middle Ages, Mary was understood as a goddess figure. This is explicit in the writings of Mechtilde Magdeburg, a 13th century Beguine laywoman, who in fact ended her life as a nun, a very politically active woman, kept a journal, which we have today. And several times in that journal she calls Mary goddess. And she was attacked by many of the clergy for saying that, but she never took it back. Furthermore, was that within 100 years, over 500 churches the size of cathedrals were constructed all over Europe, like Chartres Cathedral. And every one of them was dedicated to Mary. Now, you have to meditate on the phenomenon of this. You know, what can get a whole civilization, a whole people, to bring together its laborers, its artists, its bishops, its financiers, its architects, everybody to do one thing over a 100-year period.
To this day, Mary still bears the names of her pagan ancestors: Queen of Heaven, Lady of the World, Mother of God.
We can see that there were two kinds of religion. There was the religion of the elite, the formal Catholic Church religion, and then there was the popular religion of the ordinary people, who were by far the overwhelming majority of people in France. And their religion was still full of the old religion, the goddess religion, the nature religion, the religion of spirits.
The most famous visionary of her age was Joan of Arc. In 1429, she led the French to victory over the English after 100 years of war. 2 years later, she was condemned as a heretic and a witch by the same church that would eventually elevate her to sainthood. Prophetic and valiant in battle, the French later wrote of how her presence, goddess-like, had won and inspired them. A magic tree, a hilltop shrine, and a sacred spring in the countryside of France all played a part in Joan's early life. It was here she first heard the voices that would help her lead the French to battle. Joan gave her voices the names of Catholic saints, but her faith was deeply rooted in the old religion. She claimed that her voices gave her an authority greater than that of the church.
And in fact, at the time that she was a girl, it was not unusual for women to take prophetic roles, to be visionary leaders or to be mystics. So she wasn't inventing this. This was part of the background that she grew up in as a possibility for women. And she was relying on individual inspiration, a direct pipeline. That wasn't acceptable. If people could rely on direct pipelines, they wouldn't need the church fathers anymore. They wouldn't need the institutional church. They wouldn't need the whole system of authority that was theological, but was also related to all kinds of other areas of life besides spiritual practice. That was a direct challenge to the most important structures of authority of that time. By Joan's time, the church was increasingly rigid. It was increasingly on the defensive. And it got more and more doctrinaire, more and more concerned to quash dissent, to quash difference. It was more and more threatened by it because of the changes that were taking place in the broader society.
By the 15th century, in villages like this one in France. The old order was changing. For thousands of years, women had been the physicians of the people. They understood the principles of anatomy and nutrition. They birthed babies and held the dying in their arms. Priests fumed as the village wise woman received the honor and gratitude the church claimed for God alone.
The witches, the wise women, the healers, were always also the counselors. It's like a whole other tradition of knowledge and learning that has been suppressed because it had political implications.
The Inquisition announced that no one did more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives. They eased the pain of labor, God's punishment for Eve's sin. They interfered with God's will through the use of birth control and abortion. New laws proclaimed that any woman dared cure without having studied was a witch and must die. Since most women were barred from university, the rise of the male medical profession was guaranteed. Women continued to practice, but now they did so in fear of their lives. It was the testimony of male doctors that sent many to their deaths.
The witch burnings were a way to take control of women's powers of reproduction, which of course includes sexuality, and women's powers over reproduction, which could include midwifery, contraception, abortion, women's control of women's bodies and reproductive issues. This is part of a process of housewifization, of domestication of women that took place over several centuries, but it began in the same period as the witch burnings.
It was a time of social upheaval. As trade expanded, landowners pressed for the confiscation of peasant land. People rebelled as they were driven off their farms and into cities and towns. Those who demanded reform were branded enemies of God. Charges of witchcraft followed hot on the heels of peasant rebellions. Repression increased. Anyone considered helpless, mysterious, or aberrant was victimized, and punishments became public spectacles. Many suffered, but women suffered most of all. Those who spoke out wore the mask of shame. If they gathered in groups, they were plotting against men. Husbands were advised from the pulpit to beat their wives, not in rage, but out of charity for her soul. Those who made a dress too ornate wore the dressmaker's collar. Those who fell asleep in church, the rosary necklace. Others faced the ducking stool.